Hello everyone, I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to The Audio Analyst. Anyone who knows me has followed my writing over the decades or this channel since its inception will be well aware of my love for the work of one of the most revered and celebrated classical composers, Ludwig van Beethoven. I'm such a devotee of his music that my second episode, the first of my Guilty Treasure explorations of individual albums, Guilty Treasures, Beethoven, Symphony No. 9, dropped on May 17, 2020. His Ninth Symphony is widely regarded by critics and musicologists as not only a masterpiece of Western classical music, but one of the supreme achievements in the history of music. My episode 2 will provide you all the evidence you may need to understand that I embrace that assessment of this masterful symphony's importance. For those who are interested, you may find a link to that early episode in today's description. However, if or when you choose to check it out, please recall that it was only my second episode and that I was still working out both my production proficiency and discovering and honing my on-camera presence. My fascination with and appreciation of Beethoven's work began even before my relatively formal introduction to his vast body of work and influence on Western music in junior high school, where I not only had Miss Bloom's music class once a week throughout the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, but also sat in her music room for homeroom period every morning before the day's classes would begin. She was not only a passionate teacher, but she allowed us to bring in and play our own records, quietly, during that morning homeroom period. Once my fascination with Beethoven's music was ignited, it was inextinguishable. And it would be disingenuous of me not to acknowledge that some of my enchantment for his work early on was stoked by the emphasis placed on the significance that the Ninth Symphony played in Stanley Kubrick's masterful 1971 allegorical film exploring the importance of free will in a society that constantly works to oppress the individual, A Clockwork Orange. Though I was just 15 and a sophomore in high school when it was first released in February of 1971, several of us made repeated trips to the nearest theater to witness it. John, Rick, Paul, if you're watching, I'm sure you remember that experience as vividly as do I. Ludwig van Beethoven is one of the most renowned, celebrated, and revered composers in the history of Western music, and his works rank among the most performed of the classical music repertory, spanning the transition from music's classical period to the Romantic era. Born in December of 1770 in Bonn, Germany, to Johann van Beethoven, a musician, teacher, and singer who sang in the chapel of the Archbishop of Cologne, whose court was in Bonn, he was the second of 7 children. As the son of a musician, it was no real surprise that he displayed his musical talents while still quite young. Though initially taught intensively by his father, by age 10 or 11, he received further teaching and guidance from Christian Gottlob Neffe, the court organist in Bonn, and a well-regarded opera composer and conductor of that time. Beethoven's music is recognized as forging a transition, of representing a musical bridge, leading from the classical period between roughly 1750 and 1820, ushering in the Romantic era, coincident with the gradual rise of the middle class, a direct result of the political conflicts that had swept across Europe and America between 1775 and 1875. The music of the classical era may be characterized by its strong balance and deliberate clarity of form and structure, with its decided focus on melody, harmony, and rhythm. But the Romantic era, while not blatantly abandoning any or all of those attributes, is characterized by its more deliberate focus on emotion and expression, and Beethoven avidly pioneered this new ground, exploring the greater use of unconventional forms as well as chord and harmonic progressions, choices which were seen as revolutionary in their time, and his music became more complex and emotionally charged. These distinctive innovations, along with his implementations of cyclical form and development of themes across multiple movements, as well as being one of the first composers to integrate vocal soloists and choir performances into his symphonies, allowed him to express a wider range of emotions, from triumph and joy to sorrow and despair, redefining the intent and form of the music that would come to define the Romantic era. Beethoven moved to Vienna twice, the first time in 1787 when he was only 16 or 17 years old. Planning to study under Mozart, he had no sooner arrived in the city of music when he got the news that his mother was seriously ill and near death, forcing his immediate return to Bonn. After his mother passed, he found himself bound to Bonn for some years further, while he witnessed his father's descent into alcohol abuse and financial ruin. At the age of 21, in 1792, the year after the great Mozart had passed away at the age of just 35, he made his return to Vienna, this time to study composition for a time with Austrian-born composer Franz Joseph Haydn. After quickly gaining a reputation as a virtuoso pianist, he soon found a patron in the second Prince Lichnowsky, Karl Alois. Vienna would be his home for the next 35 years, and over that time, he would move his residence over 60 times. And what may be seen as his biggest obstacle to overcome was his discovery that his hearing was failing when he was just 28 years old. Nevertheless, he continued to compose and conduct throughout this time and found himself completely deaf by the age of 44. My visit to the small apartment and its courtyard in the Hilgenstadt area of Vienna, which has been expanded and turned into the Beethoven Museum, where Beethoven made his home beginning in 1802, with the hopes of healing his failing hearing, left me dumbstruck. The realization that I was walking in the same courtyard, climbing the very stairs, and standing in the same rooms where the maestro had composed his Tempest Sonata and the first passes at his Third Symphony, eventually known as Eroica, was simply electrifying. The 1821 Streicher replica 5-pedal forte piano, with its specially modified hood to help him hear what he was composing, was not only a beautiful instrument that was meticulously maintained, but it also served as a tragic reminder that to compensate for his worsening and ultimately total deafness, he implemented other solutions, such as a special platform he could use to permit him to feel the vibrations of music. And while he performed throughout the city at various theaters and halls, even in palaces, he died on March 26, 1827, at age 56, from liver cirrhosis. Knowing of my passion for Maestro Beethoven and his work, it should be seen as almost inevitable that when I was invited to Vienna last November to cover the launch of the new flagship Callista Mantex DAC from France's Metronome Technology, an event that I covered in E150, the Callista Mantex DAC launch event, that I would make time to follow, even marginally, the trail left by this composer during his time spent in this illustrious city. Though my Uber driver at first thought I had given him the wrong destination, I made my way to the maestro's final resting place. After 3 relocations, the last made in 1888, the maestro now rests amidst a cluster of famous composer graves in Vienna's Zentralfriedhof cemetery. But here, at gravesite 29 in group 32A, in a picturesque arrangement of the graves of other composers, including several members of the Strauss family, Brahms, Gluck, and Schubert, I was almost overcome by the flood of exhilarating and intoxicating sensations rushing over me. While there is a monument erected in this group honoring Mozart, He was buried in Vienna's St. Mark's Cemetery, now a public park, where another memorial gravestone marks the grave's most likely site. What is now the Hotel Sacher was first built in 1870 as an apartment building on the site of the old Hoftheater am Kärntnertor, the Royal Theatre where his monumental Ninth Symphony premiered on May 7, 1824. The theater's construction began in 1709, and though it burned in 1762, it was rebuilt and reopened 2 years later. The opulent Vienna Court Opera House, now the Vienna State Opera, began construction just across Philharmonica Strasse from the Kärntnertor in 1861, and when it was finished in 1869, the original Kärntnertor was raised the following year. Even though the original Royal Theatre was no longer standing, I simply had to visit the site where this monumental work had premiered. The performance had required the largest orchestra ever assembled by Beethoven, and while no complete list of premier performers exists, many of Vienna's most elite performers are known to have participated. Officially directed by Michael Umlauf, the theater's Kapellmeister, though Beethoven insisted on sharing the stage with him, the Kapellmeister had instructed the singers and musicians to completely ignore the deaf maestro's direction and only follow his. It was the composer's first on-stage appearance in 12 years, and by all accounts, the hall was packed with an eager and curious audience, including many famous royals and musicians, such as Franz Schubert. Reportedly, when the work concluded, Beethoven was several bars off and still conducting. So the contralto singer, Caroline Unger, walked over and gently turned the maestro around to face and accept the audience's rousing cheers and applause. According to one published critic's report, the response to the performance was jubilant applause, with the adoring audience rewarding the performance with 5 standing ovations. Now, if you know this remarkable symphony, or if you don't and you choose to listen to it for the first time, try to keep in mind that its creator was completely deaf when he composed it. Chew that over while you are being swept away by its grandeur, power, and splendor. There is a moving recreation of this performance and of many other moments in Beethoven's life, beautifully depicted in Bernard Rose's exceptional film, Immortal Beloved, which I highlighted with a Guilty Treasures on Film episode, E12, in July of 2020. I've included a link to that episode in today's description. In all, I visited several other of Beethoven's known residences, including the apartment he occupied from October 1822 to March 1823. During his stay here, he composed large portions of some of his most famous works, including the Missa Solemnis, the Ninth Symphony, and the Piano Concerto in C minor. Today, the building is a home to a restaurant, fittingly named after him as just Ludwig van, and offering classic and modern interpretations of Viennese cuisine. One of my most anticipated location visits was to the apartment where he had finished the Ninth Symphony in the winter of 1823 and 1824. Here, a stone tablet bearing a relief of his face was mounted at that residence on the 100th celebration of the first performance of the symphony in 1924. My final visit was, appropriately, to his last residence. In October of 1825, Beethoven moved into his final lodgings at the old monastery of the Black Spaniards, where he remained until his death. This apartment was located on the upper floor of the building near the church facade of the former monastery. Yes, the original building was raised in 1904, but the memorial plaque now designates and announces its original location. No historical music visit to Vienna could be considered complete without a stop at the celebrated apartment of Mozart. The MozartHaus is located in Vienna's Old Town, not far from St. Stephen's Cathedral, and was Mozart's residence from 1784 to 1787. Sadly, it is his only surviving Viennese residence, and is now a museum and a very popular tourist attraction. During my musical quest throughout Vienna, I took 11 Uber trips, covering over 81 kilometers or more than 50 miles. I also logged 42,000 steps, or nearly 20 miles during my 5-day stay. If it isn't clear by this point, this was one of the most exhilarating and fulfilling trips I've ever taken. The tug of nostalgic wonder, the surges of emotion, the sense of discovery and understanding, and the fulfillment of a lifelong bucket list finally accomplished was nearly indescribable. It is my sincerest hope that some degree of the wonder and joy of my Vienna experience is represented with this presentation, and that it may inspire some of you to pursue such an exploration on your own. As always, thanks for taking the time to drop by today. Further information on supporting the channel may be found in today's description section or at my website, theaudioanalyst.com. Please stay safe and keep the music playing. Till next time, cheers.